So I grew. So those who came in a little late, we're experimenting with recording today, and I was too short for the camera when we first started. So today we're hearing from the book of James, chapter 3, 13 to 18. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about who is the wisest person you've ever met, or who you know, who you consider the wisest person. What makes them the wisest person that you know? What makes them so wise? Now, listen now for the living word of God. Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful or false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. The Spirit of God has been present in the reading and hearing of these words. Thanks be to God. So my key premise today is that a life lived with envy is a life that does not necessarily show the wisdom of God. You notice I've caveated that a little bit, but it's really today is a warning about the impact of envy in our lives. Do you remember the first time or any time you ever felt envy? For me, what comes to mind is when I was in middle school and I got to play on a basketball team, a school basketball team for the first time. I was really excited. And you might need to know that I had a very clear sense of just how good I was until I got to the team, where I ran into someone who was way quicker, way more accurate with their shooting, and way more admired by all for their skills. And I can remember the feeling that was within me, a feeling a feeling of discontent and resentfulness, because someone else had something that I wanted, that I saw favorable, that I longed for. The admiration of others. Envy. It is something that is part of our everyday life, something that has been with us from the beginning of time, I would say. And I'm going to reemphasize those points or support those points as I go through here. We English speakers have just this 4-letter word to get at something that is really, really, really complex. German, though, has 2 great words. One, Glücksschmerz. It's just fun to say German words from time to time. Glücksschmerz is that feeling of unhappiness at the good fortune of someone else. In other words, someone has something that I might want, and I'm sad about that, sorrowful. There's no ill will in the feeling. I don't wish them bad. I just would like to have what they have. The person, I think, any of us, if Glücksschmerz is at work, the person deserved what they have. It's just that what they have is enviable. And then there's Schadenfreude. I think I messed it up. This Schadenfreude. Any German speakers in the room? I'm sorry if I'm slaughtering your language. This is more of a feeling of resentment, of annoyance. There's maliciousness in this. There's ill will toward the person who has whatever we might want. Glücksschmerz, it's I long for an object. I don't wish any ill will to the person who has it. Schadenfreude, envy of this type. I'd be okay if that person, say my fellow basketball player, twisted her ankle and I got to play more. Get the difference of what I'm talking about? Envy can bring feelings of inferiority and resentment into our lives, feelings of longing. In an article entitled, "This is Why We Actually Envy Others," J.R. Thorpe, now this is from the social science field, J.R. Thorpe offers several reasons why envy is a part of everyday life. First, it's been part of the evolutionary process. Relying on Richard Smith, Thorpe posits that if humanity didn't feel envy, then we wouldn't develop. We wouldn't have developed. We would have basically just stayed put, content wherever we were. No smartphones, no smart cars, no fancy electrical drums. Right? Envy is a part of life that encourages us to see and go, wow, I wonder if. So in this way, envy isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? It helps us to develop. That was a new concept for me because I'm so used to hearing people say envy bad. But actually, as I think about it, I wouldn't be where I am if there weren't women ahead of me and others ahead of me who envied the opportunity to preach and teach within churches and then turned that envy into social justice action. That ties to another point that J.R. Thorpe makes, and that part of our developing of an understanding of fairness comes from a place where others have envied and said, this isn't fair that some have and others don't. Let's make it so the playing field might be leveled. It also can be behind our feelings of prejudice. Have you ever heard someone say, yeah, they got it, but they don't deserve it? Driving those words is envy. That sense that a certain group may have been more than capable of producing something, but they really didn't deserve the benefits of their labor. That what they had, others deserved. We see that in World War II and in other times where we've had genocides happen throughout history. I encourage you, if you're a person who loves history, read it with an eye on where is envy at work. Usually it's not for the betterment. Usually it's for the destruction of others. Thorpe mentioned that young adults actually are the most prevalent to envy. Now that's good news for those of us who are older, that apparently we might be able to grow out of it. But if you think about the role of envy in a young adult's life, it's a time in your life when you're trying on new things. You say, hey, that looks interesting. And maybe you may try on, oh, that doesn't quite fit. Okay, that looks interesting. In this case, it's that envy playing a role to help us develop, right? It's a positive thing. For those of us who are a little older, what envy does look like is this longing for bygone days and the things of the past. Envying the lives of others way back when. Here, what envy does is it keeps us looking back, idealizing a time in such a way that we fail to pay attention to all the wrongs that happened in those times, to the harms that happened. Instead, we look at the vehicles or the way communities sort of look together. Envy also can rear its head when we actually raise up one place over another. Now, I've had the opportunity to live in a lot of different places. And I've met others who have. Have you ever met someone who longed to live somewhere else? Like I have a friend that all they can think about is Scotland. And they live in Pennsylvania. And I love this friend dearly. But I see in their life what envy does when we compare where we live currently with some longed off ideal place. What it does is it nurtures dissatisfaction with the life we have. Sometimes we need that dissatisfaction, but to be honest with you, cultivating a sense of contentment in life can bring peace. Envy says, no, everywhere else is better than where you are. Probably the one place envy shows its greatest sort of impact is in the social media world. Think about it for a minute. No one tends to put on places like Facebook the bad things that are going on in their lives, or the hurtful things, or the sad things. We see shots of vacations and family reunions, which are beautiful, beautiful things. But too much of a diet of someone else's life, again, creates envy and discontent. So envy can impact our everyday lives. It can do so to help us grow, but it can also create such a sense of dissatisfaction. It is that envy I want to caution us against. An envy that can ultimately lead, in some cases, to the devaluing of others and to harmful actions. In our faith life, envy can cause all kinds of trouble as well. Yes, it's part of human nature, as I've mentioned, to look at something and want it and see it desirous. We see in the scriptural witness from the very get-go stories that point to the dangers of envy in life and in our faith life. Think first about the story of the first humans and that serpent in the garden. Oops. What the serpent did was sow a seed of envy. You know, God doesn't want you to eat the fruit of that tree because then you'll be like God. Then there's the story of Cain and Abel, an envy story if I've ever heard one, a malicious envy story, where one brother kills the other out of envy for the way the other was received by God. We in the church are no strangers to envy. We can do a fair job of being malicious with one another, especially when envy rears its ugly head and tries to set up a superiority, first prize kind of system. Or says some ministries are better than other ministries, when in fact, if God has called us to it, every ministry that is of God is of value. There's a quote from Frederick Buechner, and it roughly says, where your gladness and the needs of the world meet, that is where you will find your vocation, your calling in life. Not where someone else's gladness and the need of the world meet, but where your deep gladness and the needs of the world meet. One of our dangers as individuals and as a church is to look at what other people are doing, see the fruit that it's bearing, and saying we must be like them. If we were only like them, then we'd have 12 buses and we'd have 50,000 people around. And you get my point? Ministry envy will kill the soul and will kill the church. Looking at what other churches are doing instead of praying and discerning where we are being called will destroy us. Envy keeps us looking somewhere other than where God would like us to focus our attention. So what do you think the deep gladness, your deep gladness is? What brings you joy? And where do you think there is a need in the world that if that joy is lived out and connects with that need, something beautiful will happen? When we think about our call, about our vocation, about living lives in light of the wisdom of God, that is where God asks us to be. Not in someone else's gladness and need, but in our own gladness, meeting the needs of the world around us. Envy is very powerful. So how do we stand against it? That sort of bitterness that can come in because of it? Well, our letter from James today says it's by living a life in light of the wisdom of God. It's allowing the wisdom of God to so fill us that our lives then can be used to the glory of God. There we will find our vocation, our deep gladness in the need of the world coming together. It's unwise, this envy and selfish ambition, and it can only bear the fruit of discord. Have you ever been somewhere where something really kind of neat is going on, and then all of a sudden someone starts whispering, they're not really as great as they think they are? That's envy. We could do that if only. That's envy. Unwise. The wisdom of God. If you want to find the wisdom of God in the world, if you want to embrace the wisdom of God, you'll find it in humility and gentleness, good works, and places where peace is sown. Remember, when someone is sowing discord, one needs to ask, is this God's wisdom or earthly wisdom? Where we see the fruit of humility and peace, we can be certain that God's wisdom is at work. It's not a wisdom that we can just cultivate on our own. I can't suddenly say, today I'm going to be more humble. Because guaranteed, just by having said that, the humility goes right out the window. It's not something I can cultivate on my own, or any of us can. I can say, today I'm going to be more gentle, and to a point, I might be able to live into that. But invariably, I'm going to tell you, I firmly believe this, God will bring someone across my path that will test that commitment that I'm trying to do under my own power. No, the only way to grow in the wisdom of which I speak, to live a wise life, comes a little bit further in the letter of James. We didn't hear that read. It comes in the 4th chapter, verse 8. Draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. Draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. That is the promise of God and God's wisdom. We will grow when we do so. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30 says this. It's the New Interpreter's Version. New Revised Version has a different, Standard Version has a little bit different translation. So NIV, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. So, family of God, my hope this day is that we might find a heart at peace, having drawn near to God, trusting that God has drawn near to us in this moment. And as we leave, we will leave people who bear witness and bear the wisdom of God into the world. May it be so. Amen.